Isabella opened her eyes, struggling against the overwhelming darkness that pressed in on her from all sides. Panic surged through her as she realized she was confined within a narrow space. The air was thick and musty. Each breath she took a harsh reminder of her grim reality. It took a moment for her to comprehend where she was. A coffin. Her body was paralyzed with fear, her heart racing uncontrollably. She tried to recall how she ended up here, but the memories were fragmented and elusive. The muffled voices of her husband, Daniel, and her so-called friend, Vivian, reached her ears. Their conversation was faint but unmistakable. She could make out snippets of their dialogue, filled with ominous undertones. The words inheritance and $5 million floated through the darkness, sending shivers down her spine. Daniel's voice, usually warm and reassuring, now carried a cold edge. It's done. She's gone. No one will find out. Vivian's response was a harsh whisper, tinged with a cruel satisfaction. She never saw it coming. You've got the money now. Just make sure everything looks natural. The realization hit Isabella like a physical blow. Her own husband, whom she had trusted and loved, was conspiring with her friend to kill her for the inheritance of $5 million. The betrayal was staggering. How had she not seen the signs? How could she have been so blind to their treachery? Despair clawed at her insides, but she knew she had to stay alert. Panic was useless now. Survival depended on quick thinking. She tried to focus on the voices outside the coffin, hoping to piece together their plan or find an escape. Just then, a persistent barking pierced through the thick silence. Isabella's heart leaped. The sound was rhythmic, almost insistent, and it seemed to be growing closer. She could hear the agitation in the dog's barks. It was not a normal bark, but one filled with urgency. In the cemetery, Henry, the seasoned gravedigger, looked up from his work with a sigh. The cemetery was quiet today, save for the incessant barking of his loyal white dog. Max Henry was used to Max's antics, but today, the dog's behavior seemed unusually frantic. He frowned and wiped the sweat from his brow. The barking was starting to get on his nerves. Max, what's gotten into you? Henry grumbled, pushing his wheelbarrow towards the source of the noise. He followed Max's frenzied path until they arrived at an old, recently dug grave. Max's barking was now accompanied by scratching at the dirt, his paws frantic. Henry's curiosity got the better of him. He grumbled under his breath as he pulled back the dirt to reveal the coffin below. The persistent barking was driving him mad, so he decided to investigate. He approached the coffin with a mix of irritation and concern. Henry's old hands trembled slightly as he unclasped the coffin's lid. The hinges creaked loudly, and a rush of stale air escaped the small space. As he opened it fully, the sight before him froze him in shock. Isabella's terrified eyes met his, and she gasped for fresh air. "Oh my God!" Henry exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're alive!" Isabella's relief was palpable. She struggled to sit up, her body aching from the confined space. "Please, help me!" she cried, her voice hoarse and weak. Henry extended a hand to her, helping her out of the coffin. "What on earth happened?" he asked as Isabella stumbled out, her legs unsteady. Isabella quickly gathered her thoughts, trying to piece together her fragmented memories. "Daniel, my husband, he and Vivian, my friend, they planned this. They wanted to kill me for the inheritance. They thought I was dead." Henry's eyes widened with realization. He understood now why Max had been so insistent. "We need to do something about this," he said urgently. "If they think you're dead, they might make a mistake." Isabella nodded, her mind racing. "We need to expose them. I don't know how much time we have before they realize I'm missing." Henry thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I'll help you. But first, we need to alert the police. I know someone who can help. Officer Reynolds is a good man. He'll believe us." As they hurried to make their plan, Isabella's gratitude was mixed with fear. Her world had been shattered, and now she was relying on a stranger to help her. But she had no choice. Her only hope lay in revealing the truth and ensuring that Daniel and Vivian faced justice. Meanwhile, Daniel and Vivian continued their conversation, oblivious to the fact that their plan had been thwarted. They were discussing how to cover their tracks, believing that Isabella's death was secure. The money, they thought, was as good as theirs. Little did they know, the grave had become a stage for a dramatic turn of events. The very betrayal they had orchestrated was about to unravel, thanks to the persistent loyalty of a dog and the determination of a gravedigger. Henry and Isabella hurried through the cemetery, their footsteps crunching on the gravel paths. Isabella was still disoriented, her mind reeling from the horrifying revelation and her narrow escape. Henry, though concerned for her, kept a steady pace, determined to get to Officer Reynolds as quickly as possible. They reached Henry's modest home, a small, weathered building adjacent to the cemetery. Inside, Henry's kitchen was simple, with a few old wooden cabinets and a small table. Henry picked up the phone, his hand steady despite the gravity of the situation. He dialed Officer Reynolds' number, hoping the officer would be available to help them. After a few rings, Officer Reynolds answered. "Reynolds here. What's the emergency?" "It's Henry," Henry said urgently. "You need to come to my place immediately. There's been a serious crime and it involves Isabella Rhodes. She's alive and needs your help." Officer Reynolds' voice was sharp with concern. "What do you mean she's alive?" "I thought—" "It's a long story," Henry interrupted. "Just get here as soon as you can." Within 30 minutes, Officer Reynolds arrived. He was a tall man with a stern expression but a kind heart. He listened intently as Isabella and Henry recounted the entire ordeal. Isabella's voice trembled as she explained how Daniel and Vivian had conspired to kill her for the $5 million inheritance. Reynolds' face darkened with concern as he processed the information. "We need to act quickly. If they think you're dead, they might be planning their next move. We need to catch them red-handed." Isabella nodded, her fear mingling with hope. "Please do whatever it takes. I need to see them face justice." Reynolds agreed, and the plan was set into motion. Henry and Isabella decided to use their knowledge of Daniel and Vivian's whereabouts to their advantage. They knew that the couple would be expecting the situation to go as planned and would be complacent. Their plan was to catch them off guard. Later that evening, Henry and Isabella, along with Officer Reynolds, made their way to Isabella's home, a modern two-story house in Seattle that she had inherited from her parents. The house was eerily quiet as they approached, the lights dimmed, casting long shadows over the lawn. Inside, Daniel and Vivian were lounging in the living room, discussing their newfound wealth with smug satisfaction. "It's only a matter of time before the money is ours," Vivian said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "We've covered all our tracks." Daniel grinned, clearly pleased. "Yes, and once we're done here, we'll be living the life we've always dreamed of." As they talked, Henry and Isabella hid in the adjacent room, their breaths held in anticipation. Officer Reynolds, with his badge concealed, prepared to make his entrance. The tension in the room was palpable. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and Officer Reynolds stepped in, his authoritative voice cutting through the silence. "Daniel Rhodes, Vivian Johnson, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Isabella Rhodes." Daniel and Vivian's faces went pale with shock. "What?" Daniel exclaimed, leaping from his seat. "How?" Before he could react further, Isabella stepped into the room, her face a mix of triumph and relief. "Surprise," she said coldly. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" Vivian's eyes widened in disbelief. "How? I thought you were dead." Henry, standing beside Isabella, added with a firm tone. "You two made a grave mistake. Max here led us right to you." Max, Henry's loyal dog, sat calmly by his side, his presence a symbol of the pivotal moment that saved Isabella's life. Daniel tried to flee, but Max's sudden growl and bark stopped him in his tracks. Officer Reynolds moved swiftly, handcuffing both Daniel and Vivian. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Daniel and Vivian were led away in handcuffs, Isabella felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had survived, and justice was about to be served. The house, once a symbol of her trust and betrayal, now held the promise of closure. Henry, despite the exhaustion etched on his face, offered a comforting smile. "You're safe now. We did it." Isabella nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Henry. I don't know what I would have done without you and Max." Officer Reynolds gave a reassuring nod. "We'll make sure everything is handled from here. You've been incredibly brave." As the police took Daniel and Vivian away, Isabella looked around her home, realizing that the journey was far from over. She needed to confront the emotional aftermath and rebuild her life. The shadows of betrayal were still fresh, but with the help of new allies and the possibility of healing, there was hope on the horizon. The sun was setting over Seattle, casting a warm orange glow across the city. Isabella sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea in hand, trying to make sense of the whirlwind events of the past few days. The betrayal of her husband and friend had shaken her to the core, but now she was determined to find a way to move forward and make a difference. Henry was in the next room, sitting with Max and staring at an old photograph of his daughter, Emily. The photograph was faded and creased, a stark reminder of the family he had lost. Despite the chaos, Isabella knew Henry's personal journey was far from over. She had promised to help him reunite with his estranged daughter, Emily, and she was determined to keep that promise. Isabella picked up her phone and dialed the number she had for Emily, a number she had obtained through her own research. After several rings, a voice answered, cautious but curious. "Hello, this is Isabella Rhodes," Isabella began, her voice steady but compassionate. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm calling about your father, Henry Clark." There was a moment of silence on the other end before Emily responded, her tone guarded. "What about him?" "I have something important to discuss," Isabella said. "Henry has been through a lot, and I believe it's time for you two to talk. I understand there's a lot of hurt, but I think there's a chance for healing." Emily was quiet for a moment, weighing her options. "I don't know. It's been years since we've had any contact. What makes you think I should even consider this?" Isabella took a deep breath. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I've seen the pain Henry has been through. He lost you and his wife, Sarah, in an accident, and it left him devastated. He's not the same person he was back then. I'm offering to cover your Aunt Margaret's medical bills if you agree to meet him. I believe this could be a chance for both of you to find closure." Emily hesitated before responding. "Okay, I'll think about it, but I need to know why you're so invested in this." "I understand," Isabella said. "Let's just say I've been through my own ordeal, and I believe in second chances. I'll be in touch with the details." After hanging up, Isabella shared the news with Henry. The old gravedigger's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Do you really think she'll agree to meet me?" "I believe she will," Isabella assured him. "We just need to be patient." The following week, Isabella and Henry traveled to the small town in Oregon where Emily lived. The drive was long, and the weight of the upcoming meeting pressed heavily on Henry's shoulders. He glanced at Isabella, who offered a reassuring smile. When they arrived at Emily's modest house, the air was thick with anticipation. Emily opened the door, her face a blend of wariness and curiosity. She led them into a cozy living room filled with books and warm lighting. The atmosphere was tense, but Isabella could sense a glimmer of hope in the air. Henry and Emily sat across from each other, the silence between them a chasm of years lost. Isabella sat nearby, her presence a quiet support. Emily's eyes softened as she looked at Henry, who was now visibly nervous. "I never thought I'd see you again," Emily said softly. "It's been so long." Henry's voice cracked slightly. "I know. I've made many mistakes, and I'm sorry for everything. Losing you and Sarah was the hardest thing I've ever gone through." Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've resented you for so long. I didn't understand why you disappeared, why you left us. I thought you abandoned us." Henry's voice was filled with sorrow. "I never meant to abandon you. I was in prison for a crime I didn't commit, and I couldn't reach out. I've spent years regretting my mistakes and the time I lost with you." The room fell into a contemplative silence as father and daughter faced each other. Gradually, the emotional wall between them began to crumble. Emily's resentment, though still present, started to give way to understanding and forgiveness. "I've missed you, Dad," Emily finally said. "I've missed the chance to have a family." Henry reached out, his voice choked with emotion. "I've missed you too. I want to make things right if you'll let me." Emily nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and hope in her eyes. "Maybe we can start fresh. It won't be easy, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try." The meeting ended with a tentative promise of reconciliation. As Isabella watched the two of them embrace, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had helped mend a fractured family, and in doing so had also begun to heal her own wounds. The days following Isabella's meeting with Emily were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. The emotional reunion between Henry and his daughter had set the stage for new beginnings. But there was still the matter of Daniel and Vivian, who remained unaware of the full extent of the consequences for their actions. Isabella and Henry, along with Officer Reynolds, had been meticulously planning their next steps. Daniel and Vivian had been living under the assumption that Isabella was dead, and their scheme had gone smoothly. They were about to discover the truth in a way they never expected. It was a chilly morning in Seattle as Isabella and Henry arrived at their final confrontation. The scene was set at Isabella's luxurious home, where Daniel and Vivian had been invited under the pretense of discussing legal matters regarding the $5 million inheritance. The invitation had been carefully crafted to lure them into a trap. As they arrived, Daniel and Vivian were visibly excited. They were eager to finalize the inheritance details, believing that the path was clear for them to claim the money. The atmosphere was charged with false cheerfulness as they stepped into the elegant living room, unaware of the hidden cameras and the presence of Officer Reynolds. Isabella, standing at the entrance, looked at Daniel and Vivian with a mixture of resolve and sadness. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I have something to discuss regarding the inheritance." Daniel and Vivian exchanged glances, their expressions guarded. "Of course," Daniel said with a forced smile. "What's this about?" "Before we proceed," Isabella began, "I need to show you something." She gestured toward a nearby room where Henry was waiting. As Daniel and Vivian entered the room, their faces turned pale upon seeing Henry. "Henry," Daniel stammered, clearly startled. "What's going on here?" Henry stepped forward, his voice steady. "I'm here because Isabella and I have been working together to uncover the truth. I know what you've done." Vivian's eyes widened in fear. "What are you talking about?" "Your plot to kill Isabella for the $5 million inheritance," Isabella said, her voice unwavering. "We've got evidence and witnesses. It's over." Daniel's face twisted in anger and desperation. "This is insane. Isabella's supposed to be dead." "That's where you're wrong," Isabella replied. "I'm very much alive, thanks to Max, Henry's loyal dog, who discovered me buried alive." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Officer Reynolds, who had been discreetly observing, stepped forward. "Daniel, Vivian, you're both under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder." As Daniel and Vivian were taken into custody, their protests and attempts to deny their actions were futile. The evidence was overwhelming, and their betrayal had finally come to light. With the perpetrators dealt with, Isabella took a moment to reflect on the recent turn of events. The house that had once been a symbol of her betrayal now stood as a testament to her resilience and the strength she had found in her relationships with Henry and Emily. Henry and Emily were starting to rebuild their lives together. The once grim cemetery had become a place of healing, and the connections forged in darkness had led to new beginnings. Isabella's life, too, had found a new direction. The trust that had been shattered had been slowly repaired, and the pain of betrayal had been replaced with hope and friendship. As Isabella stood by the window, watching the sun set over Seattle, she felt a profound sense of closure. The story had come full circle, revealing that even in the face of the darkest challenges, there was always a chance for redemption and a fresh start. The journey had been arduous, but the result was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of second chances.